Hello, how you doing? And welcome back to the channel. What are the three positions that England need to sort out, that need to fix, that need to know what their best option is before the World Cup later this year? That's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. I've picked the three positions that I think it's most important for Steve Borthwick and that coaching group to get a better idea of. But make sure you drop a comment down below and let me know what your three key positions would be. Also, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel as well, that's always massively appreciated. All right, let's get into it. So I decided to go for three positions. You could quite comfortably go through most of the England 15 and point to question marks surrounding it, but I wanted to narrow it down to the three main positions that I think are perhaps the biggest areas of concern, the biggest amount of uncertainty around at the moment. And yeah, these are just the positions that I think Steve Borthwick, as I said in the intro, we need to know what our best options are for that World Cup. So starting off in the forwards first of all, and it's the second row. Now, even though Maro Itoje hasn't been on particularly great form, I think for a little while really, I still think when it comes down to it, when it comes to those big games, you have Itoje in your second row, partly because of the credit he's got in the bank, but I also just still think that he still operates at a pretty decent level, even though we haven't necessarily seen him at his best for a little while. So my question, it really is Maro Itoje and who else? And I don't think England have ever really replaced George Kruis. In fact, I think Saracens have missed him a lot as well in terms of their performances and their ability to compete against kind of the biggest packs in the world. George Kruis was that tight headlock, massive man, key in the line out that I think was absolutely pivotal for England. And actually, as time has passed since he stepped away from the international game, I think it's become more and more evident how important he was. So it's kind of that tight headlock. Who's that other guy in that second row that can just kind of bring that tight five together? Because I think for the most part, England's front row is, we know our best options, partly because there's not much depth there, but I think we know who our best front row is. Presuming it's going to be Itoje, who's then that fifth guy that can really bring that tight five together? So, I mean, Charlie Ewels was the guy under Eddie Jones, wasn't he? Towards the end of the Eddie Jones era, it was Charlie Ewels. I think there's a lot of question marks over him and whether he's good enough at international level. I mean, he's been out for a long time injured anyway. He's just left Bath, hasn't he, to go over and get more game time. So I don't know about Charlie Ewels. You then got Johnny Hill, who for quite a consistent time actually was partnering Itoje in that England second row, and they looked like they had a pretty decent combination going. He's an absolute menace when it comes to defending mauls. He's good around the park as well, a good option in the line out. But then he dropped away in the early days here under Steve Borthwick. We didn't really see Johnny Hill in the Six Nations at all. Then we've got Dave Ribbans and Ollie Chesham. They both came in. Both did all right, actually. I think Ollie Chesham, out of all the options I've mentioned so far, in terms of just what we've seen of him more recently, Ollie Chesham is the closest to having that other jersey and partnering Maro Itoje in those second rows. I thought for the most part he did quite a good job in the Six Nations, but I still think we're not 100% sure if he is that guy. Obviously, Joe Launchbury, once upon a time, he's 32 now, hasn't really been involved in the international setup for a little while. Could he come back in 60 plus caps or whatever it is? So he's got the experience. And then the one other name that I would throw in there, and I don't know if this is a person to come in and start straight away, but it's definitely a name I want to see involved in the England setup, and that's George Martin at Leicester, who I think is a little bit more explosive. I did Leicester against Gloucester a couple of months ago, and he came off the bench in that game and just added a real bit of firepower off the bench into that Tigers pack. So I'd quite like to see George Martin come into the England setup in some capacity. But other than that, as I say, in terms of the names I mentioned there, I'm leaning towards Ollie Chesham, but I'm still not certain. Make sure you comment down below. Let me know what you think about what's the best second row combination. In fact, some of you might not even agree with me that Itoje is the guy that should be in there because his form hasn't been good enough, in which case we're looking at probably a brand new combination, but let me know anyway. The next position I want to talk about is scrum-half. Now, for a short period of time, I was pretty pleased about the investment in Jack Van Poortvliet. As a young guy, I thought he did pretty well in the early days of his international appearances. He had a real impact in Australia, came off the bench against Argentina in the autumn, scored a try, I think with his first touch, where he all of a sudden spotted a gap, had the acceleration and pace to burst through, and just gave a real bit of breath of life into the England team. I think he's faltered a little bit since then. You forget how young he still is, though. He's going to have a lot of time to improve. So I definitely don't think that it's the end of his international journey by any stretch. But I just wonder whether it's a time for someone else to be given the reins at scrum half. And I think that guy is probably Alex Mitchell, who has looked good for England coming off the bench. He's been excellent for Northampton over multiple seasons in the Premiership. He's never really been given a huge opportunity with England. I would like to see him be the starting 9, and then we can look at maybe some of the younger options coming off the bench behind him. Raffi Quirk, I think if he's fit, has to be involved for England. I think he is the most... I think he's arguably maybe outside of Mitchell, just because Mitchell's been doing it longer. But I think Quirk is one of the most all-round scrum halves England have, in the fact that I think he can control a game, but he's also incredibly explosive. He's got a hell of a lot of pace. He can impact the game in so many ways. So I think long-term, Raffi Quirk for me would be the England 9. It just depends on fitness, because he's had so many injuries. This year's been very stop and start for him, which has been so frustrating. But I'd like to see Raffi Quirk involved. And then you've got Harry Randall, who is an option as well, who's certainly, I think, an option off the bench. If you can get a side that's moving forward on the front foot, you want a bit of zip, a bit of pace, Harry Randall's a great option. So there are options there for England. I think it's working out who they are ahead of the World Cup. As I say, I'd like to see Alex Mitchell as the starting 9. If he's fit, probably Raffi Quirk coming off the bench. And then it depends how many 9s you take. If they take 3, then I think you're maybe going for Jack Van Portfleet over Harry Randall at this moment in time. But Randall, who's had a pretty decent season in a fairly poor Bristol side, is a good option as well. Final position for me that I think is so important for England to get right and to narrow down is centre. And the centre combination for England has always been up in the air, uncertain, issues with Manu Tuolangi for a long time, waiting for when he's fit, playing Owen Farrell at 12, when should he be playing fly half, etc, etc. England seem to have finally landed on an inside centre in Ollie Lawrence, who was really good during the Six Nations. I hope they stick with him. I'm ignoring whatever is happening at fly half, whether that's Marcus Smith or Owen Farrell. Honestly, I'm not too worried at this moment in time. I'm more focused on the centres. So presuming you've got Ollie Lawrence at 12, who's your 13? Now, the obvious option is Henry Slade, because he's got 50 plus caps. He is one of the more experienced players. He's good for Exeter. He's a good kicking option. He's a distributor, so he balances quite nicely with Ollie Lawrence. But for me, there's something about Henry Slade, and I think he's a great player. I think he's been so good for Exeter. I just don't think we've ever really seen it at international level. Now, is that because of the chop and changing combination? He's never been able to build a partnership with someone? Or is it because the international game's just that little bit quicker, a little bit more intense? I don't really know the answers to that, but I'm not fully sold on Henry Slade. So then it brings into question, are you relying upon Manu Tuolangi, who has been throwing some form together? He's been a little bit more consistent this year, but obviously has a huge problem with injuries in terms of his track record. And then, of course, him and Ollie Lawrence, are they too similar? Is that not enough distribution in that centres? I think that would be a reasonable concern. You've got Matt Scott and Guy Porter, both guys at Leicester Tigers, can both play 13. They play a bit of 12 as well, so you've got that versatility. And then I just wanted to throw a couple of names in there that I think the World Cup will come too soon for them, but I think players to look out for the future. That's Seb Atkinson at Gloucester, who's come in at inside centre for them and I think done a really good job. What is he? I think he's 20... Is he 20? I think he's 20. He'll be 21 by the time the World Cup comes around. Don't necessarily expect him to be involved, but I think it's a guy to keep an eye on. And then Will Joseph at London Irish is the other option as well. I think there are some younger players maybe coming through that we could see step into that 13 jersey. But at this moment in time, if Ollie Lawrence is your 12, which I'd imagine most people watching the video would be pretty happy with, who's your 13? And the more I look at it, I think maybe it is Henry Slade, even though I'm not that enamoured with the option. I think with Manu, first of all, you have the injuries and also there's a lack of distribution in the centres. If you're going for full power, then it kind of makes sense. Or maybe a Matt Scott or a Guy Porter, players that aren't that experienced, but it's something new. You're trying something new. Maybe one of those two, but I think there are question marks there. So that's kind of my views. Those are the three positions for me that I think England need to nail down. They need to get a better idea of in time for the World Cup in France later this year. Drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think of all of those, all the points I've gone through in the video, and also let me know what positions you think are of real significance and importance for England. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and as always, guys, I'll see you in the next one.